Today on Wolverine Fan Therapy, we're going to cover a recap of Michigan's 35-7 victory over the UNLV Run Rebels. And we're also going to discuss the oligopoly in college football has been destroyed. Alabama, Clemson, gone from the oligopoly that has had a stranglehold on college football for the past several years. For joining today's episode of the Wolverine Fan Therapy Podcast. Well, Wolverine fans, we blew out UNLV 35-7, but Wolverine fans still have some reasons for grousing. We're going to cover the game and go over some of those issues that Michigan fans are grousing about. Try to give some therapy to you Wolverine fans on not as bad as they might seem. Things are actually pretty damn good in Wolverine world after Michigan football's 35-7 victory over the UNLV Runnin' Rebels, albeit with some concerns about the offense. First thing that Wolverine fans need to understand is that these changing rules in college football for 2023, speeding up the game, is resulting in about 2 less possessions per game. So that was definitely had a big effect on Michigan's game against UNLV. Drives that normally would have only caused the time to expire by 2 or 3 or 4 minutes were actually causing 5, 6, 7 minutes to come off the clock. So it resulted in less possessions. Michigan probably had 2 fewer possessions in the game against UNLV, and that's part of the reason why Michigan's offense only scored 35 points. Michigan did not punt in the first half and really controlled the line of scrimmage and controlled the game and could have scored quite a bit more. So they did not cover the spread, and that was a big part of the reason. And then, of course, UNLV's touchdown that was scored in the fourth quarter, Michigan had third and fourth stringers in on defense. A lot of guys getting their first glimpse of action. So let's go over, first things first, let's go over some of the positives that Michigan, that we see on out of Michigan on offense. And some of those positives include things that really only a few teams in the country could boast. Michigan's quarterback, J.J. McCarthy, is playing at an elite level, really Heisman finalist level, and worthy of Heisman attention. His statistics through 2 games are really ridiculous and record-setting. He's throwing the ball with pinpoint accuracy. He has thrown no interceptions. He's thrown 5 touchdown passes. He's completing almost 90% of his passes. Really, it's kind of incredible. Don't want to underappreciate exactly what he's doing. And then we've got Roman Wilson. Of course, Roman Wilson has emerged as a bona fide star. He's scored 5 touchdowns through the first 2 games. And as I look at football at all levels, for scoring, it really is about who's going to score touchdowns. If you break down statistically football, it comes down to who's going to actually score touchdowns. And most touchdowns are scored by quarterbacks, wide receivers, running backs, or tight ends. That's pretty obvious. But there are players that have a knack for scoring, and and football comes down to a game of who's going to actually score those points. Obviously, we know touchdowns are better than field goals. That's why red zone offense is always such a focus. But more specifically, who's going to actually score those touchdowns? And if you look at all levels of football, there are just players that have a knack for scoring and for getting in the end zone, and it is a real skill to develop. And then there are other players who have a knack for who are good players, but just don't seem to have that knack for an end zone. and for getting to the end zone and scoring touchdowns. One of the huge progressions and huge developments that's happened with Michigan's offense over the course of 2022 and the 2023 season is Roman Wilson's knack for scoring touchdowns and ability to get to the end zone. This is not a minor thing, okay? He's really developed this knack, and for that reason, he's become a bona fide star. Next big positive that I see is Cornelius Johnson and his improvement. He looks improved in 2023. Part of that's J.J. McCarthy for sure, but Cornelius Johnson is not making the mistakes that he has in the past with drop passes, and he had a key fumble in the Michigan State game last year. And he seems more assertive, more willing to sacrifice his body, to go get the ball, to leap, making an athletic play, and there's tremendous potential there. He seems like a guy that is very capable of being that second option to make a big play, to get a first down when needed. So this is a big deal. Next in the wide receiver category, Tyler Morris looks like a really nice third wide receiver option and a real contributor. He's a sophomore player now wearing number 8, Ronnie Bell's number from the 2022 season. We really like what we see out of Tyler Morris. He did not play in the first game against East Carolina. He played quite a bit against UNLV and produced at a high level. Next, on the offense, we are seeing glimpses of the massive potential of Colston Loveland and A.J. Barner, the transfer from Indiana, at the tight end position. If you have a solid running game and you have solid wide receiver options, that's how tight ends can be left wide open. You see this at every level of football. If the defense, especially the safeties and linebackers, have to respect the run game, they bite on the play action pass, and they have to cover wide receivers because they're productive, they're getting open, they're scoring, then it leaves gaping holes in the defense, usually in the middle of the field, but could be on the sidelines, it could be all over the place, where the tight ends can just slip in there, and to the viewer, whether you're in the stadium or on TV, they look wide open, like, oh my gosh, how could they leave him wide open? That's when you hear the announcer goes, oh my gosh, Colston Loveland's wide open, and he hits him. So we're just beginning to see the potential that these guys have, and I think because these games haven't been very competitive, there hasn't been a lot of reason to draw up specific plays to get those guys the ball in space. It's really going to be something that Michigan can key on as we go through the season and get into tougher competition. Bredesen, fullback, now wearing number 44, looks really good in the fullback role for Michigan, and that's a real positive. Probably one of the biggest positives that we see from Michigan's offense, and a reason why we're not that panicked at this point that Michigan hasn't had these huge 75-yard touchdown runs, is that Michigan's having no red zone issues. This has been a huge problem from past seasons. Remember in 2021, it really cost us the game at Michigan State, was the fact that we were scoring field goals instead of touchdowns. So there's no red zone issues for Michigan. They scored 5 touchdowns yesterday. Their red zone percentage is nearly perfect on the season, and this is huge. Many other teams around the country, even big name teams like Ohio State and others, Alabama, big reason why they're having trouble is they're not scoring touchdowns. They're able to get drives into the opponent's territory, often near or into the red zone, and then they have to kick a field goal. It's a huge issue that Michigan is scoring touchdowns, and a huge positive for the offense. And it's important to point out that they are doing that without using J.J. McCarthy as a runner. There was one quarterback draw against UNLV. There's very plain vanilla play calling, and there's really an emphasis to protect J.J. McCarthy and not get him injured. So Michigan's not doing the old Denard Robinson quarterback draws, or back in the day, Tim Tebow. Florida had a great red zone percentage because they would use Tim Tebow as a battering ram and just, he would plow into the end zone. We're not doing that. So that's a huge positive for Michigan's offense, and it's something that as the season goes on and there's tougher competition where games are being decided in the second half, where there's close games that are important, JJ has tremendous running ability and tremendous ability to use his legs to score in the red zone. Michigan has not needed to do that. The productivity of Michigan's offense, 65 points in 2 games, high red zone percentage. They've been extremely efficient and effective in the passing game. And all this is being done with a very jumbled coaching staff in the first 2 games. I am not, most people are claiming that there's been no big deal, that Jim Harbaugh hasn't been there, that Sharon Moore wasn't there in the first game of the season. I'm not of that mind. I think it does make a difference in the level of intensity, the level of crispness to the team. It's been really impressive that Michigan's been as efficient and workmanlike as they have been without their leader, and that's pretty impressive. And then the last big positive I see, and I want to point out to Wolverine fans for Michigan, is that they are way ahead of all the other teams in the Big Ten that are not named Ohio State and Penn State. Penn State offensively has looked really good, probably the best in the conference, one of the best in the country through two games. Ohio State, you're going to get a lot of complaining from Ohio State fans and others, but hey, let's face it, their offense is pretty dang good, even breaking in new quarterbacks. They've got amazing skill position players. They have 4 running backs, some of the best wide receivers in the country in Harrison Jr. and Emeka Egbuka. Sorry, his name's hard to pronounce. So other than that, if you watch any other Big Ten teams play, Michigan is wildly more effective and light years ahead of Michigan State, Minnesota, Wisconsin, Nebraska, Iowa. All the fanfare about these other schools with new coaches, new quarterbacks, new systems, they're just not nearly as productive as Michigan has been through 2 games. Maybe they've played different levels of competition. Maybe they've played road games, whereas Michigan games have been at home. All that's true. I'm just saying all those teams would trade places with Michigan in a heartbeat, with the exception of Ohio State and Penn State. So we're not looking at this completely with rose-colored glasses. We are not Pollyanna by any stretch of the imagination. Some of the negatives that we've seen in Michigan's offense so far, Davis Warren has looked bad. He fell down and kind of looked kind of silly in the East Carolina game. All right, that's not that much of his fault, just had a bad break. But he threw a bad interception against UNLV, and he just hasn't looked like he's progressed at all. And he doesn't look like he's really a clear backup to J.J. McCarthy. Jack Tuttle does look like he could be a good backup quarterback. He looks a little small, and he did in the spring game, and he has so far this year, but it's too bad he got hit late in the UNLV game and wasn't able to come back. He looked like he was fine on the sidelines, but he didn't come back in the game. He could have the potential to be a serviceable backup for J.J. McCarthy. We'll get to the offensive line. Look, the offensive line is working in 3 new players this year, 2 transfers from Stanford, and frankly, they have looked like they're working in 3 new players. They're having some issues creating obvious running lanes, and they don't seem to be playing really with an edge. I attribute some of that to the level of competition in East Carolina and UNLV. I attribute some of it to the fact that their coaches haven't been there. Jim Harbaugh, Sharon Moore in the first game. I think that makes an impact. But I also attribute some of it to just not gelling as an offensive line as they are working in new players. So look, this is a concern. I'm not pressing the panic button at this point, but it is somewhat of a cause for concern as we aren't seeing those obvious gaping holes created in the obvious running lanes. The next thing I'll point out is the plays with Donovan Edwards and Blake Corum, where they're both on the field, seem a little bit disjointed. They those plays haven't produced big results. They're trying to work in some new plays, jet sweeps with Donovan Edwards and some other things. They haven't really worked all that well. They look like they're new plays, and they look like they're working out the kinks. So the reality is they just haven't produced big results. I think there's potential for them to do that, and there is a lot of potential to run some exciting plays with both Blake Corum and Donovan Edwards on the field. These feature running backs who both have so much talent and both can break games, break plays off, and take it all the way on any play. I think there's a lot of potential. We just haven't seen it come to fruition. And then the last negative I'll point out is, unfortunately, Michigan just hasn't seemed to develop a real RB3 option behind Corum and Edwards. I know that was something that a lot of people talked about before the season. In these 3 games, we should be able to see if C.J. Stokes or Benjamin Hall or someone else, Khalil Mullings, anybody can be a bona fide third option at running back. And we haven't really seen that so far. Again, if you just pause for a second and look at these issues, these are amazing problems to have. And again, outside of Penn State and Ohio State, there's no other team in the Big Ten that has these as their problems. Most of the other teams in the Big Ten are trying to figure out who their first running back is. Most of these other teams in the Big Ten are trying to find offensive linemen that can even play at this level. Michigan has in their 2 deep probably 10 offensive linemen that could conceivably be considered as starters. So that's our overview of the Michigan offense. We're going to focus on the defense later. Michigan's defense has played lights out. Their first team defense basically has given up no points and really no drives of any of any distance in the first 2 games. They are playing at an amazing level, especially the front 7 of Michigan. And part of the reason why we say the front 7 has played so well is because Michigan is not played with their 2 best defensive backs. Rod Moore, their safety, and Will Johnson, who both are all Big Ten players, potential All-Americans, have yet to really play in the first 2 games. So the fact that Michigan's defense is having this kind of success, yes, against 2 weaker offenses and 2 of the weaker opponents that they're going to play, is really just amazing. So we'll be back more to talk about all the superlatives about the defense a little bit later in the week. Next, we want to talk about how excited we are as college football fans that the oligopoly in college football has been officially broken. If you remember back a few years ago, in the college football playoff era, the 4-team college football playoff era had really been dominated by 4 teams: Alabama, Clemson, Ohio State, and Georgia. Those teams seem to be favored to make or to actually make the college football playoff every year, with the exceptions of LSU when they broke through one season, but of course LSU is still an SEC team. And then, the random Cincinnati or TCU. It was really, every year it was just a question of which one of Alabama, Georgia, Ohio State or Clemson is going to win the national championship. Which one's going to be the best? And that oligopoly was apparent, and it has, without a doubt, that has been broken. And last night's game, Alabama lost at home to Texas. So, and then of course the first week of the season we saw Florida State really dominate LSU in the second half of their game. LSU and Alabama were both pretty high favorites to make the college football playoff. Maybe Alabama was down a little bit, but and then of course we can't forget that Clemson, who had again was a favorite and seemed like they were in almost a shoo-in to make the college football playoff, the 4-team college football playoff every year. Just a few years ago, got blown out in their first game at Duke. That was a road game, but it was Duke. Okay, so kind of amazing if we look at the current odds to win the college football national championship. Of course, Georgia's still the prohibitive favorite. So Georgia and Ohio State, out of that oligopoly of 4, are still, up there, no question, and they are the prohibitive favorite. But Alabama and Clemson are nowhere to be seen. This is just, it's amazing to see how we can't underappreciate the impact this is on college football. Okay, if you look at the odds to win the national championship, Clemson now has the same odds to win the national championship as Colorado. Just think about that for a second, okay? Colorado won 1 college football game last year, and they now have the same odds to win the CFP championship as Clemson, plus 8,000. Kind of crazy. It's just nuts when you think about it. Notre Dame has moved up quite a bit. They looked good, and they finally have a real quarterback and Sam Hartman, and so they won impressively at North Carolina State. It's ACC. We all know the ACC's pretty overrated, and I think North Carolina State's been pretty overrated for the last couple years. It's been frustrating to see them continuously pop up in the top 25 when I just don't understand it. So, but Notre Dame's now up there at plus 2,200. So, but Alabama has fallen, even has lower odds than Notre Dame. So when you look at the odds to win the CFP championship, the Vegas odds, Georgia's the prohibitive favorite at plus 200. Behind them, second is Michigan at plus 500, and then you have Ohio State at plus 900. Now Texas at plus 1,100, Florida State coming in at plus 1,200, USC plus 1,600, Penn State plus 1,800, Notre Dame plus 2,200. So Alabama isn't even in the top 9. And Oregon, Tennessee, LSU, Washington, Oklahoma all have better odds than Clemson. So Alabama still seems to have this darling Cinderella effect, but they've fallen way down the list. And if you watched the game against Texas, to see Alabama struggle to move the ball at home in an early season non-conference game, I mean, this is something we haven't seen since Alabama chose Nick Saban over Rich Rodriguez to be their head coach, 15 years ago. It was incredible. So it's really exciting in terms of parity and moving toward a 12-team playoff next year. You really see just tremendous excitement. Some of these legacy fan bases, these massive legacy fan bases that haven't had a whole lot to cheer about in terms of national prominence for several years, now seem to have been invited and are back in the game. Texas, Florida State, Washington, USC, these are massive fan bases. They really move the needle with TV ratings, with revenue. They really should have something to say about who wins the college football national championship. They're now finally back. So the oligopoly has been broken. We couldn't be happier about this. so we just think it's great. And time will tell if Colorado and some of these other programs can hang in there. But to have a wider conversation and to have some of these massive fan bases back included in the conversation, we think is really, really good news for college football fans and for the overall health of college football nationally. So that's it for today. Thanks so much. We'll be back again with more coverage of Michigan's defense and how well they played, plus a preview in a few days of next opponent. Michigan's next opponent, the Bowling Green Falcons from the Mid-American Conference, making the trek up US 23 to Ann Arbor to take on the Wolverines. All right, thanks everybody. Have a great, great week, and God bless you, and all the best to you Wolverine fans. Hang in there. Talk to you soon. Hey, listen, if you enjoyed this video, if you enjoyed this podcast, do us a huge favor and hit that subscribe button. And please hit the like button. And hey, if you got something to say, please comment and share with your friends. Let's help grow our community. Wolverine Fan Therapy, we're all in this together. Let's go Blue!